Hello, Paul here, and welcome to my latest video. Today I will be flying on Ryanair from London's Gatwick Airport to Dublin, Ireland, which covers a distance of 302 miles and a scheduled flight time of 1 hour and 20 minutes. And remember, if you like videos about travel and flying, please consider clicking on the subscribe button, and also consider clicking on the bell so you'll be notified when I post a new video. This is Records Travels. Let's take a trip. So today I will be flying on Ryanair, which is one of Europe's biggest low-cost carriers. Now I've heard many stories about Ryanair, the majority of which were not too favorable, but I was still eager and anxious to try it out for myself, and I figured a short flight like this would be the perfect way to get a sense of what Ryanair is all about. So boarding a Ryanair flight almost always means that you'll be walking out onto the tarmac and up a set of stairs. Because I was seated in 23E, it made sense to board at the rear of the plane. Luckily, it wasn't raining at the time, but I would imagine you could get quite soaked boarding a plane under less than ideal conditions. Just something to be aware of if you ever fly Ryanair. You will be boarding from the outside of the plane. And then I was a bit surprised to see the queue going into the plane was moving very slowly and even stopped at some points in time. And as I approached the door, I realized why. The flight attendant was actually checking everybody's boarding pass a second time. Even when I told her I knew where my seat was, she said she still had to check it. And this just seemed really redundant and unnecessary. So as soon as I turned to move down the aisle of the plane, I was visually overloaded by the bright yellow seatbacks that are a signature of this carrier. Ryanair operates only Boeing 737-800 aircraft, and this particular airplane was only a little over a year old. It was still pretty new. The aircraft is an economy-style cabin, 3-3 configuration, and there's plenty of space in the overhead bins, but do be aware that Ryanair places restrictions on the size of your carry-on bag, or hand luggage as it's called in Europe, and anything that's not small enough to be stowed under the seat in front of you will cost you an additional fee. It's also quite obvious that these seats are not like most airline seats. They're extremely thin and have very little in the way of cushioning. I didn't mind this on a short flight, but anything longer than probably 2 hours would likely impact your comfort level during the flight. And of course, the entire time you're staring at the safety information on the seat back in front of you. So Ryanair is definitely a no-frills carrier, and knowing that going into it can help you temper your expectations. But if we take a look at the seat, there was one thing that was definitely surprising to me and one thing that was upsetting. Surprising was the fact that there was 30 inches of pitch, which was an inch more than I got on EasyJet, so that was nice. But not having a seat back pocket was absolutely the most annoying part of this flight for me, because I didn't realize how much I relied upon it to be able to put things when I had to move things around, and not having it there definitely impacted my experience on the flight. And I found it to be quite frustrating, actually, to not have it there. It's something that you just kind of take for granted and expect, but you will not get it on Ryanair, so make sure that you're aware of that.
The time to Dublin is just 1 hour. Weather conditions are quite nice. Dublin similar to here, just clearing up, bit of low cloud in the morning. Temperature there 15 degrees. We hope you enjoy the flight. Thank you.
Now, unfortunately for me, this flight had a significant delay for departure and actually wound up sitting on the plane on the ground longer than I was in the air due to that. But it gave me another opportunity to get a look at these very, very thin seats. Very, very thin indeed. And no seat back pocket. So we sat on the runway for about an hour and a half, which is longer than the actual flight itself. So that definitely added to my frustration with this flight. We finally got cleared to take off, and the flight attendants were able to start their safety demonstration to get us ready to be on our way to Dublin after, again, a very, very long ground delay.
To the nearest exit in an emergency. There are 4 main doors, 2 at the front of the cabin, 1 left and 1 right.
And here's a close-up of the safety information on the seat back in front of you, which is good to see, but also kind of a little unsettling at the same time to have it in your face the entire flight. Now, one of the things that my seatmate pointed out is that the tray table was absolutely filthy and disgusting, covered in crumbs, and clearly hadn't been cleaned at all. When I took a look at mine, it was kind of in the same situation. Not quite as bad, but still. The problem is that Ryanair sometimes flies their planes as many as 8 segments in a day, and they're not on the ground long enough to be cleaned, and so you encounter things like this. So just again, something to be aware of. You get what you pay for. So finally, after the significant ground delay, it was time to taxi out to the runway and be on the way to Dublin. The flight from Gatwick to Dublin is not very long, so shortly after we were up in the air, the flight attendants came through with their food and beverage cart. But remember, nothing is complimentary on Ryanair, so even a bottle of water you're going to have to pay for. It's best to plan ahead and bring your own. The only trick is trying to find somewhere to put it because, again, you don't have that seat back pocket. And it didn't take long at all until we crossed the coast of Ireland and began the gradual descent into Dublin. So finally, after the ground delays and the flight itself, I finally landed in Dublin and was very happy to be there. And now reflecting back on my Ryanair experience, I knew going into it that they were a low-frills budget airline, and they definitely lived up to that reputation. And remember that Ryanair is designed to do one thing, and that is to get people from point A to point B as cost-effectively and as efficiently as possible. And they definitely do a good job of doing that. But a couple of the things that stood out to me that made this experience less than optimal were the fact that the plane was dirty. And that's because these planes, again, they get used so frequently. They're not on the ground for very long. They don't have adequate time to be properly serviced. And so you saw that in the tray table and the condition it was in, which was unacceptable. The boarding process was very inefficient, with having to have the flight attendant check your boarding pass once you were on the plane, even if you knew where your seat was at. That slowed the process down. It kept people outside. And then also the fact that there was no seat back pocket. That probably more than anything was the most annoying thing about being on a Ryanair flight for me. But knowing that if I used them again for a short flight, they probably would be just fine. And I did get to Dublin, so it served its purpose and it was all good in the end. Thanks again for watching.